So some best practices for actually leading your meeting. Creating a welcoming environment, of course, so everybody jumps on the call, making sure everybody is comfortable with potentially how to use the technology. I lean towards that because I know so many of us are in the virtual meeting space right now. Does everyone understand the technology that we're on, understand how to mute, unmute? Do they know the rules of engagement? Obviously, depending on the meeting size, sometimes there's small talk in terms of creating that welcome environment. And then same thing, I guess, even if you are in person, making sure everybody is able to connect to the internet, or, you know, that the leaders of the meeting or anyone that's presenting, if it's not you, is able to connect to the right equipment and all that good jazz. Also starting with the end in mind. So we kind of talked about this already, right, in the preparation of the meeting. When you're opening the meeting, making sure that you're opening in that way. So first of all, providing an introduction, why are we here today? And then moving into what is the goal of this meeting? Is it a discussion? Is it a decision meeting? Is it a training meeting? And also specifically stating by the end of this meeting, it's our goal to blank, right? By the end of this meeting, it is our goal to make a decision on X item. By the end of this meeting, we'd like to have a discussion and understand what our next steps are, or if we need to pull in additional resources to move forward this specific initiative, etc. So reviewing that purpose, I kind of just talked about that with starting with the end in mind. Re-reviewing the agenda. You can also at the beginning of the meeting, when you review the agenda, understand if anybody has any additional items. I usually like to ask, does anyone have any items to add to our list today? If not, we will make sure that we reserve, 10, 15, 5, whatever it is, minutes at the end for any questions or other items that you thought of throughout the time.
Kelly, you've got a couple of great questions coming in. I just want to take a pause here. So Brian asked for formal meetings, right? So this is the information, annual board meeting, vendor solicitation meetings, things like that. Do you always recommend preparation of an agenda? And then we also have another one coming in from Vincent about how long do you wait to get the meeting started, and what do you do when the participants are showing up late and really ruin the flow of that? So.
Yep, absolutely. So for formal meetings, 100%, I always recommend framing up an agenda for something that's specifically like a full day, right? We want to make sure that the stakeholders understand where their time is going to be spent, if they're responsible for bringing anything, if they're responsible for leading any sections, are there any guests joining the meetings? Also making sure they understand when their break times are. Are they going to have time to check email throughout the day? Do they need to log out, shut down their computer, not be able to be available to others? All those sorts of specific detailed pieces, I think, are really important to include. Before I move on from that one, Molly, do you have anything else to add to that one?
Oh, we always have an agenda. The way I think about it is the level of detail of the agenda can really be adjusted to meet the need. So in cases where you're providing all brand new information and you don't really want to put a lot of that information out there ahead of time, especially if it could cause issues if they can't immediately ask questions, sometimes it might be higher level, but always saying what that objective is and what those different components of the meeting ahead of time. And leadership especially needs to lead by example in those cases in order for adoption for the rest of the team. So
absolutely.
Yes.
And then to answer your question, Vincent, I think this also just really depends on a couple of factors. So A, the meeting size, and B, the stakeholders that are missing from the meeting. So I have been in meetings before where like the primary stakeholders missing, they're responsible for, they're the subject matter expert. And so starting the meeting without them would be less impactful. So I might hang on a little bit longer for that individual. If you're on a large meeting and you've done the pre-prep and the stakeholders that are supposed to be there to present are, you talk to them 5 minutes before, like we talked about in that pre-planning, and everybody's ready to go, we probably want to wait less time on a larger meeting to get going on that, right? So for example, on these types of webinars, we usually only wait until a minute or two pass because we've put it on people's calendars, they've taken time out of their day to come, and it might be, more people coming, or we don't always know exactly how many. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time.
And let's be honest, I skip the first 3 minutes of webinars because it's always admin anyways. But Vincent brings up a great question, Kelly, that I think you were going to get to, but I want to bring up here as well, which is when do you make the call to cancel that meeting if you don't have a critical stakeholder? That's
Yeah,
always a hard one for me.
it is really hard. I would say 10 minutes is usually what I go with personally. I think 5 minutes is a little bit of, they could be running from another meeting. So it's somewhere between that maybe it's more like 7 minutes, but it's somewhere between that 5 and 10 minute mark. Of course, we're reaching out to that person, especially if they were supposed to be a primary stakeholder on the call, to understand if they're coming, if they're running late, just so that we can at least inform the participants while they're hanging on.
And I am happy to have audience participation here. You guys are asking some great questions. I oftentimes feel that is a question that really relates to the culture of the organization and the expectations set, right?
Mhm.
So there are organizations that are really fantastic and mature in the way that they start meetings 5 minutes after the hour. They anticipate and like they have really strict guidelines in terms of what that looks like. In other organizations, as a consulting organization with clients and everything, sometimes I give a little bit more time depending on the organization and the expectation, depending on if I have access to send an instant message or what the expectation is set there. But I oftentimes feel like from organization to organization, there are different rules of engagement associated with meeting start times. We've definitely been brought in to help some organizations have better experiences with not wasting time in the beginning of meetings and making sure that the meetings come out with action items. But it's a great question, and there's not a one size fit all answer to it.
Yep. Great points, Molly. Thank you. Okay. So we're for opening meetings, assigning roles. So this really depends on the meeting size also. So in some cases, as the meeting leader, you may be the note taker and the timekeeper. And making sure that you're seeing who's attending, right? But for a larger meeting, or maybe even a meeting that you're presenting on. So for example, this webinar, right? I am presenting, I have the presentation up on my screen. So Molly is keeping, she has been assigned the role of keeping track of questions in the chat and taking any notes if we need to, and that type of thing. So you don't always need to assign specific roles. Sometimes you are going to be that assigner if you are the leader of the meeting, but in those larger scale meetings, or depending on the circumstances, you're going to assign out roles, right? Also setting expectations. So, if it's virtual, is the expectation that cameras are on? If you're in person, is the expectation that, laptops are closed? And again, kind of going back to starting with the end in mind, setting expectations on, what is our end result going to be? Is this a discussion or is this a decision?